Next, a crime and drugs story in two parts. Part one is a documentary report from Los Angeles on the violent warfare between gangs. Part two, a debate over new proposals to decriminalize the use of drugs. Now, part one. The reporter is Jeffrey Kay of public station KCET, Los Angeles.
The beefed-up patrol was sparked by one of the bloodiest shooting sprees in the city's history.
The violence was shocking. 1 dead, 11 wounded in a gang drive-by shooting Friday night.
Despite the crackdown, the violence continued last night. 5 people were wounded in drive-by shootings.
But with 70,000 gang members, the police are outnumbered.
The local news from the front is relentless. Last year, gang-related violence claimed 387 lives in Los Angeles. By comparison, that was 4 times the number killed in Northern Ireland's civil war during the same period.
Hey, we got a pit bull on this side.
Police raids on gang targets reveal a sinister pattern of drugs and violence. Weapons confiscated from gang members are invariably linked to the drug trade. Because of that connection, the story behind the upsurge of gang violence in Los Angeles begins 3,000 miles away in Miami, Florida. Nearly 4 years ago, Vice President George Bush showed off a new tool in the war on drugs, a high-tech chase boat. Bush's demonstration was part of the much-heralded federal crackdown on Miami Vice. The government vowed to choke off the Southeast as a port of entry for South American drug traffickers. But the smugglers stayed in business, looked to the porous California-Mexico border, and came west. The market is a lucrative one. This surveillance tape shows Colombian cocaine dealers counting their take. They are reaping an abundant cash crop. They deal directly with veteran gang members, according to Lieutenant Clarence Chapman of the LA County Sheriff's Office. He says the well-heeled middlemen who often launder drug money through legitimate businesses use street gangs as a distribution network.
They will hang out with the gangs. They're very familiar with them. Our intelligence leads us to believe that they keep that working knowledge of the gangs to know who comes in and who goes out, who's controlling what territory, and those kinds of things.
The territories where the gangs sell drugs are often sidewalks or public parks. Here, a car drives up to what is essentially an open-air market. A woman removes a package from her blouse. She makes a quick transaction and waits for the next buyer. The hot item is crack or rock cocaine, a mixture of cocaine and baking soda. It's easy to dilute, which makes it profitable, and it is highly addictive, even in minute quantities. The desperation of users creates a burgeoning demand. Street cops trying to stop the trafficking are overwhelmed and frustrated.
Cocaine and drugs are destroying this country, and it's going to get worse.
Why is it going to get worse?
Because we're out of control. We are out of control.
Sheriff's deputies Robert Rifkin and Mike O'Hara police the gang areas of southwest Los Angeles. Neighborhood graffiti here mark territory. When one gang crosses out another's logo, it's a sign of war.
The Lennox is the whole wall there. They wrote it nice and big, so all the other rival gangs can come by and see this belongs to Lennox. You're in Lennox area here.
This area of South Los Angeles is chiefly Hispanic. Black and Hispanic gangs do not intermix.
This street here is well known for drug sales. Usually illegal aliens, Mexicans, will be selling dope on the street. See these two right here? They're local dope sellers and gang members.
The two, nicknamed Sneaky and Trapper, seem accustomed to police pat-downs, and they are proud of their gang loyalties.
You fighting with Inglewood 13? Yeah. Who else you fighting with?
My enemies.
What about Tepla?
Tepla, I don't like Tepla.
You don't like Tepla right now, huh?
Why not?
Chavalas.
Sneaky and Trapper are Crips, one of LA's 2 major gang groups. The other is Bloods. Bloods and Crips are mortal enemies, with hundreds of smaller neighborhood subgroups called sets. Affiliations count for little, since sets of the same gangs often fight each other. A few blocks away, we run into one of Sneaky and Trapper's adversaries, Chico, a rival Crip from the Teppa set. Chico says Teppa controls the area's drug distribution.
Nobody can hang around over here, not the gangs.
What happens if they do?
I don't know. Maybe he can get killed.
Other gangs can't come here and sell dope in your area.
No.
You control this area.
Yeah.
Not far away is a black neighborhood, turf claimed by different but just as violent gangs. Here we find a different culture. but the same deadly code of retaliation.
You know, somebody killed your homeboy, you want to kill all their homeboy. That's a person you love. You know, you want to take care of some kind of revenge.
26-year-old Junebug is a victim of this attitude. He lost his leg in a shooting at the age of 14. In January, he was left paralyzed after a drive-by shooting.
How do you think gang members feel when they do a drive-by shooting and hit an innocent person?
They don't care.
Why don't they care?
They don't care about themselves. They just want a reputation.
What do you mean by they want a reputation?
Want to be known.
They want to be known within their gang that they're tough?
Yeah.
Often, drive-by shootings are a form of gang initiation. The gangs are beefing up their firepower, often with stolen weapons. Police, too, are equipping themselves with semi-automatic weapons for raids which have uncovered caches of assault rifles, semi-automatic and automatic firearms.
Enough of the killing, enough of the terrorism, enough of the fear. Enough is enough.
In the gang-ridden sections of Los Angeles, the communities are in perpetual mourning. Here for a young girl killed in a random shooting. And here for a police officer shot when he confronted two street corner drug dealers.
Jim, we love you. Bye, old buddy.
The June '87 killing of Officer James Pagliotti brought an outraged chief of police to the scene in the North Los Angeles community of Sylmar.
These are no good, miserable sons of bitches that are plaguing this city, and we got to get rid of them.
One of those charged in the crime is 19-year-old Thomas Pee Wee Mixon. According to the police report, Mixon said he was in the area selling rock cocaine because his own community was saturated with dealers. Police say Mixon's friend was the trigger man, but as his associate, Mixon is also charged with murder. He has pleaded not guilty. Mixon, who has a record as a small-time drug peddler, is held in a section of LA County Jail reserved for the Bloods. His red shoelaces distinguish him from Crips, who often wear blue.
Because that's the side that I live with. This the side, the group of people that I live with.
Mixon's lawyer wouldn't let him discuss the case, but Mixon did talk about his background. He said he isn't a hardcore gang member, but fell in with gangs because of where he lived.
It's nothing that, you just pick somebody to hang with. If I had if I was around a bunch of musical singers, I'd be a music singer. But I was around a bunch of gangbangers, so I was considered a gangbanger.
You're saying you didn't have a choice?
No. A different area, I'd be in a different situation.
The Ujima Village housing project where Mixon lived is Bloods territory. Many residents live in fear of gangs. Annie Crenshaw, Thomas Mixon's mother, tries to keep her 14-year-old twins, Jermaine and Shermaine, out of gang activity.
So I try to keep him away from as much as I can. If I send him to the store, he don't have to be and did nothing. But to them, he's out of his territory. Whatever that means.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Like, there's blood over here.
Yeah.
There's pills over there by the store.
Yeah.
And they don't like blood. They say let's come out the park. They'll try to jump us.
What are you?
Nothing. But he's staying here.
By staying here, they think everybody in here bloods.
Just as Thomas Mixon allegedly left Ujima Village to sell drugs, other gang members are setting up shop outside their home areas on a far grander scale.
It's now spreading to the northern states on the coast, Washington, Oregon, a lot of connections between Los Angeles and Seattle, Washington, D.C., Detroit. So it spreads, and there's evidence right now that the gangs are spreading all over America. I mean, Los Angeles gangs, the Crips and the Bloods.
In Los Angeles, on January 31st, gang violence spread from the minority communities where it was traditionally confined. In Westwood, an affluent movie and restaurant district, a bystander was killed by gang crossfire. Police quickly responded to calls for a swift crackdown on gang violence.
And we will do everything in our power to put the gang members where they belong, and that's in jail, off the street.
Since February, the Los Angeles Police Department has fielded a massive show of force. On occasion, up to 1,000 police officers in a night sweep through neighborhoods, booking gang members on a variety of charges.
We're taking the streets back, and we're using every legal means we have. And one of them is drinking in public.
In other neighborhoods, public drinkers might get off with a warning. The police said these were gang members. Their blue bandanas identified them as Crips, as did their canes. and a Houston Astros cap, which signified a Crip subgroup. No drugs were found, but one man wore a beeper, often standard equipment for dope pushers. In jail, the arrestees were unrepentant. They proudly flashed their gang hand signs. The costly police sweeps are having only limited impact. They are not stopping gang activity.
It works for that night, it works for that weekend, it works for how long they're in jail. As far as this generation goes, what's going to stop gangbanging, I don't know. But by education and family values, when they're real young, it might change it for future generations. I don't have an answer for this generation.
Activists believe community involvement is one answer. At the Family Helpline, a private agency, Leon Watkins works with gang associates as young as 8 and 10 years old.
Well, the parents, again, evidently don't have the time to deal with the kids. A lot of them, they don't know what they do. They bring in the money, and a lot of times the parents don't care where they get it from, you know, as long as it's helping pay some of the bills, buy some food, pay the rent.
So the parents look the other way?
A lot of them, too many of them.
To gang counselor Leon Watkins, there is a direct correlation between poverty, high unemployment, and gang activity. He'd like to see the resurrection of pre-Reagan administration job training programs.
When that left, that's when gang violence began to escalate, if you ask me, because cocaine and drugs came in, and those of us who work with kids on a work program, we had nowhere to go and offset it.
Because they don't have that hope no more. The hope they see are the big drug dealers with the gold chains and the cars and things. They don't see a lot of success stories.
How do you tell some 11, 12, 13-year-old kid that's got $300 in his pocket that selling dope's wrong?
They got more money than we do.
Nice cars, having the ladies, all the jewelry, and that's to them, they're role models.
They can't get jobs. But you belong to a gang, and the gangs are making money doing whatever they do. You can forget about the reading and writing. You understand? I can go out and make me some money, and I want a piece of the American dream.
But this is no dream. It's an American nightmare come to life. Police predict gang violence this year will top 1987's alarming record.
Now to part 2 of our story, an update debate over proposals to decriminalize the use of drugs as a way to remove money and thus crime from the nation's drug problem. We have 2 views of it tonight. Those of Georgette Bennett, a criminologist and author of a recent book, Crime Warps, The Future of Crime in America, and Congressman Charles Rangel, Democrat of New York, chairman of the House Select Committee on Narcotics Abuse and Control. Ms. Bennett, how would decriminalizing drug use help things in Los Angeles or anywhere else?
Well, I think it would help a great deal because the drug problem that we have today is very much a problem of our own making. In a sense, the policies that we started in 1914 when we criminalized narcotics have created a larger problem than that which they were supposed to solve. Look, when we talk about drugs, we have to look at 3 different issues. There is the moral issue, there's an emotional issue, and then there's the practical issue. In terms of the moral issue, I think drugs are a tremendous scourge. I disapprove of them totally. I myself won't even drink coffee or eat chocolate because it has caffeine in it. That's how extreme I am on this issue. In terms of the emotional issue, what we have now is mass hysteria on a national scale. And it's a hysteria that will not allow us to deal with drugs in a realistic kind of a fashion, in a rational fashion. It's a hysteria in which all kinds of myths have been created about the extent of drug use and the properties of drug use. And then finally, the practical issue. And that's the one that I'm interested in. What works? What has not worked is the policy of criminalization. By decriminalization, we can do the only thing that will bring the drug problem under control, namely to take the profit out of drugs.
Well, carry that on. You decriminalize, and then as a practical matter, follow your scenario out to where there's a good solution at the end.
In terms of what decriminalization would look like?
Right.
Well, let me first make a distinction between legalization and decriminalization. I am not in favor of legalization because legalization implies a kind of laissez-faire approach to drugs, and I believe that we need regulation. and that, in fact, would be what decriminalization would do.
All right, spell it out.
Well, drug selling needs to be licensed. We need to do some very careful thinking about who would be licensed to sell drugs. It must be government controlled. There must be quality controls introduced. But above all, it must make it possible for drugs to be sold at their naturally cheap prices, because it's the street value, the enormously inflated street value of drugs, that has created this tremendous incentive for organized crime to get in on the act. In fact, it was a very natural transition for organized crime to make on the repeal of Prohibition, when the huge profits were taken out of bootlegging liquor. And now these gangs that we just saw this excellent documentary about are tied in with organized crime. It started with the outlaw motorcycle gangs, and it...
So to carry it through, though, if you were to decriminalize and you were to remove, if you were to lower the price, then what happens? You have less drug use, more drug use. So what's the end result?
The end result is that we would have a continuation of the trend toward less drug use, because in fact drug use has been declining across the board in the general population. It has been increasing among the criminals. That's true, but it has been decreasing across the board among the general population. And when you remove the incentive to sell drugs, you also remove much of the incentive to push people into using drugs. The most powerful way to stop people from using drugs is peer pressure. Not the law, but peer pressure. When it becomes something that is disapproved by people, that is a much stronger social control mechanism than defining it as a crime.
All right, let's go to Congressman Rangel and go through her points. First of all, do you agree with her that decriminalization would do in a general way what she says it would do?
No, I don't think Ms. Bennett has really thought out her position. It's good to sell books and cocktail parties chatter, but it's an outrageous position to take when we really haven't even began to fight a war against drugs. At a time where we should be talking about education and prevention, providing some opportunity to get our kids off the streets and giving them some job skills, when we should really have some foreign policy, which we don't. The Secretary of State never has put drugs on his calendar. And when you take a look at what the police are trying to do, they do this without any federal support at all. Some of the things that Ms. Bennett obviously has not thought about is that what will the eligibility be for those that would be the so-called patients of this decriminalization of drugs? Who would be
allowed to buy them?
Who would be allowed to buy them? And then I assume that there'd be a lot of poor people that wouldn't have the money, and she would not want them to enter the criminal market. And so someone will have to pay for it, and you know where that's going to end up, with a federal program. I don't know whether it would come with her thinking under Medicaid or not, but it would be an entitlement. The question would be who would be entitled. Will there be an age limit involved with this? And even if you assumed that only adults would be able to get it, does the adult have to be addicted? And if they have to be addicted first, do they go to the criminal market for the addiction? How much do you give a drug addict when you decide that you're going to legally dispense it? Most drug addicts don't want it to be maintained. They want to get high. Do we determine when to stop? And so what if we did? Wouldn't they go out and get their high someplace else? Or perhaps Miss Bennett would have us to give it until they overdose. Because a lot of people, certainly not this author, believes if this is what these bums want in this generation, even if it's a poison, even if it kills them, even if it means children will be born addicted, give it to them and get them out of our hair. So I would suggest this, that maybe when you're frustrated and you've been victimized and you just don't think the struggle is worth it, you throw up your hands and surrender. I say that this administration in 7.5 years has not developed a strategy, not a war plan, and I think we ought to concentrate on what we can do before we give up.
But what about her basic point? Even though, and we'll go back through this with her,
Sure.
but what the end result may be and some of the steps. But she says that a way has got to be found to get the money, the profit, out of drugs. As we saw in our film from Los Angeles, that's what drives the crime, that's what drives these kids, etc. How can you do it?
Well, first of all, what drives it is supply and demand. It's not necessarily just profit. If kids were driven because they thought that they needed a particular drug, are they going to be less addicted because the federal government or the local government or some private agency is giving it to them? She's not going to give it away. Somebody has to pay for it. If they don't have the money, does that mean less crime? And I'm saying that she's not going to come up with a legal dosage. They never do. But suppose she did, and they want more. Do they not go to the illicit market in order to get it? Let me say this. If you're dealing with the dispensation of a poison, an addiction, you don't reach that point until she's able to say, what have we done really to try to control demand? What have we done to make kids and people realize it's a poison? What have we really done in telling foreign governments that we won't tolerate them except in our economic and military assistance and making no effort at all to control the growth of drugs? I say in this administration, the president's people have not been honest with him. It allows the president to say we're winning the war when everyone knows that the casualties have just increased.
We're not going to fight that, the administration battle, because I don't think Ms. Bennett is prepared to do that. But, Ms. Bennett, what do you say to his just general, well, you heard what he said. It's just, you've got a lousy idea.
Well, I think that Congressman Rangel has raised some very important questions, and I think that they require a great deal of thought. I have certainly given them thought, and I'm willing to share that thinking with the congressman and have other people participate in the thinking. The congressman has certainly been in the forefront of trying to battle to get additional funds for treatment, for prevention, and I must say he's one of my strongest supporters of the point I'm making in that sense, because I believe that's where the priorities ought to be. Not in enforcement, but in treatment, in education, and in prevention. Now, the other points that he raises with reference to foreign policy...
Excuse me, what about his basic point that you're really essentially saying, you're essentially throwing up your hands, saying that none of this other thing is going to work. Let's surrender, let's make it legal and get on with it.
No, I'm simply saying that the policy was wrong-headed to begin with and has created the very problem it's intended to solve. You know, up until 1914, when drugs were first decriminalized, and that's why I think the congressman's argument about what this administration has done, I agree with him about what this administration has done and hasn't done, but the fact is that we've been fighting this since 1914, and it simply hasn't worked. Up until 1914, narcotics addiction was primarily a problem of middle-class, rural white women. And it was after the criminalization of drugs that it shifted entirely and became very much a problem of impoverished populations, of males, and of minorities, who we know are the greatest victims not only of addiction, but of the crimes that come along with supporting addictions.
I just would like to know who would be eligible for this legalized drug program. That's all I'm asking.
Well, who is eligible to smoke? Who is eligible to drink alcohol?
Well, kids are not. Will addicted kids be able to sign up for the program?
What do alcohol-addicted kids do
I'm
now?
asking,
it's an absolutely parallel situation.
Well, if you cannot afford the drugs, would the federal government give drug stamps? I mean, who pays for the drugs? Will we have competition the same way we have with the cigarette and liquor industry, where they'll advertise in the baseball parks and the tennis matches as to which drug gets you high quicker? I mean, just how far are you willing to go when you're saying that you shouldn't have this being against the law?
Well, I'm willing to go as far as we go with alcohol, where advertising is restricted, where in order to sell alcohol, you must be licensed.
How much would you allow them to get?
Where if you break the regulations, that is a crime. Now, of course, children who are addicted, we need to treat them. We have to put them in treatment programs. We have a history of clinics in this country. In the 1920s, addicts were able to go to clinics and they were able to get maintenance doses. You do raise a very interesting point when you say that what do we do with the person who doesn't want maintenance? Because you're right. Addicts usually don't want to just maintain, and that's why the English system fell apart. Because those who weren't willing to settle for maintenance doses went to a black market. But, Congressman, that black market would be very much smaller and very much less powerful than the black market that we have with the system that we have created today.
It would be hard for me to believe that you'd be willing to expose more and more young people to what clearly is an addictive and a poisonous drug, and to say that that the federal government will allow this to be legal.
But what makes you think that more kids will be exposed when it's decriminalized than when it's criminalized?
The reason for
I
it
argue less kids will be exposed.
Because if you watch the documentary that we've had here, clearly the kids in poorer communities are looking for a way out of poverty, looking for a way out of pain. Some have no homes, no jobs, no hope. And if there's anything that they can make a trip on, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or combination of it, we've legalized methadone. You know that now that methadone is dispensed legally, people then take other drugs to make certain they get their high. They divert it. They sell it. It just hasn't worked. And all I'm asking of
I agree with you. It hasn't worked.
Well, that's a legal drug. It's being dispensed. The federal government is paying for it. And it's an addictive
But it
drug.
has also made a lot of addicts lead productive lives, which they couldn't do before.
Well, it's made pharmaceutical companies a lot more richer than they have been.
We have to leave it there. Ms. Bennett in New York, thank you very much. Congressman, thank you both. A very interesting discussion.